All right, welcome to the Leadership is Female podcast. Today we've got Beth Bass, sports CEO and marketing brand executive, Hall of Fame inductee, and Naismith award winner. Wow, we are pumped to have you today. Let me toss it to you to introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm Beth Bass, and I am a seasoned, experienced sports marketing continual learner. I'm always trying to still connect dots and stay curious.
So how did you get there? Let's go back to how did you get your start in sports?
I'm not going to go too far back, but I just broad strokes or kind of like a voiceover of my career. In my voice is that I played basketball on a scholarship at East Tennessee State University, and for Susan Yao, and for anybody that's into women's basketball, know the Yao family. Kay Yao was at NC State, and I wasn't. She never said that because she was too elegant and too diplomatic, but I was not good enough to play for NC State. So I always say I went to the farm team in your baseball language and played for Susan Yao, which was wonderful. So I got really entrenched with the Yao family, working camps, and finally I was able to work a lot with Kay Yao. I'd like to circle back with that a little bit later on because she'll keep coming up in my discussion. So somehow through, again, working camps and women's basketball, I landed a job as a graduate assistant. One of the first, it was called at University of Tennessee, that small program that you might have heard about. It was the first promotional graduate assistant, and 80% of was promoting women's basketball because they only had 7 sports. And so to think I got to work with Coach Summit and end up being great colleagues, even better friends as time evolved through my next jobs. So that was wonderful. I did everything from, picking up her dry cleaning to picking up officials for games, whatever. I couldn't work fast enough. I just loved the opportunity. I always had a sense to realize this was special, right? Throughout my career, like not everybody gets to do this. And so at that time, just to show you how experienced I am, not old, but mature. She won a gold in LA in '84 in USA basketball. And then they were switching over to Converse, and she fell in love with the Converse brand. And that was back when Converse made performance products, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Dr. J, and on and on. So they asked that they wanted to hire a promotional athletic specialist, and she told me to apply. And so I went from South Carolina to Knoxville to Boston with this accent. I always say I'm bilingual. I speak mainstream English and Southern. So I don't think they understood me for the first several years, but it was an incredible experience. Stayed there 9 years, left there as the director of sports marketing. Very proud of that because I was probably the youngest except for the secretary. That's what we called him back then, but it was only 2 females in our sports marketing department. And I left, was again fortunate. I was on a short list because I got to already do some pretty meaningful key learnings. And Nike, they were hiring their first category manager for women's basketball and sports marketing. So I got to go out to Portland, and again, they're amazing, and just got to do the 95 and 96, which is really a genesis, very huge catalyst time in women's basketball in the United States. That was kind of like our dream team, and they did the whole tour in 95, and it's Lisa Leslie, Cheryl Swoops, Dawn Staley, who perfect timing. So I got to do that and do the Olympics in 96 in Atlanta. And then I just never quite adjusted to the ocean being on the wrong side. I realized I wasn't a West Coast person. And the WBCA Women's Basketball Coaches Association was located in Atlanta. And of course, they were a corporate sponsor of, Nike and Converse was involved. So I knew them very well. And so I was lucky enough to become the executive director for 12 years. And then it was kind of like the coach in waiting. I knew I'd be the CEO eventually. So I was there 18 years. And then that job, a lot of travel, a lot of pressure, a lot of fun Final Fours, to be able to hand out that beautiful crystal trophy to coaches you might not really like, but it's still awfully cool, and kind of mark that moment. So I did that. And then I took a year off, which was just wonderful. And then Adidas called, and I was able to be recruited by them. And in my time of reflection for that year off, I'm like, when were you the happiest? And it was like being in sports marketing with a big brand. At the WBCA, why I took the job, it was like having your own women's basketball company, but not your own money, but you were responsible for everything, the money, raising the money, run the Final Four and the convention, the professional development side of it. WBCA has all the divisions represented: Division 1, 2, 3, NAIA, junior college, and youth sports. So I stayed in touch with the big brands. And so when Adidas, I got to go there and write my own job description, and it was wonderful for 4 years. I said I had a great 4-year scholarship, but then the pandemic struck, and it was a phenomenal job, but bad time to be the U.S. manager of collegiate sports when there's no sports going on. So we had to go through layoffs, and that was awfully humbling. And so I took another year off and started doing some consulting work. And that's how I am here now.
What a story. And I've got a million questions for you, but I think my next one leads in pretty good. Your career spans 40 years of just incredible service and leadership in the women's basketball space. And an early deal that you inked was one of the first shoe deals in the WNBA. What was the brand? Okay, we're curious about that. What was the brand for the deal, and what brand shoes are you wearing today after all of these shoe jobs? And so many of our listeners, they work in sports and on partnerships, and I think many of the fundamentals remain the same. So can you talk a little bit about that deal?
Well, that's a great question, because I was at Converse at the time, but Converse was still the sponsor of USA Basketball. And so, but it's under the umbrella of NBA properties. So it was tough to activate, because Nike is the big tent, right, of NBA, or several other brands on the court, but you have your official rights holder. And that was Converse at the time, but hard to activate because we surely couldn't go dollar for dollar with Nike. But I was called in the office to our vice president, and he said he'd heard about this happening, that they're going to do this huge tour. I think it was like 50 games domestically, building up to 96. I think it was the brainchild of, honestly, Russ Granite and Val Ackerman, who's now the commissioner of the Big East. And they said, here's $50,000. You can sign one person probably, or you can spread it out and maybe get 3. So, but you had to sign them all for collecting bargaining. You had to sign them before actually the team was named. So that was kind of a real challenge, right? Because I didn't want to fail. They gave me $50,000, a lot of money back then. So I did my homework, and I signed Katie Stedding, who was at Stanford at the time, Nikki McRae, who played at Tennessee, and the third was Carla McGee, who was a defensive specialist rebounder. So I stretched my $50,000, signed those 3, and praise the Lord, they all made it on that day. I felt like I was waiting for it to be posted out in Colorado Springs. It was a great time. So about a year after that, poor guys, I went to Nike, but I had signed Teresa Edwards years before, who was at Georgia. And so I got to work with Rebecca Lobo and Jennifer Azzi, who were Reebok. And travel around with that's, I guess we call it now, that storm that barnstorming team and got to work with all of them. And so that was and then of course, that team was the first, I can't remember the name of it. It was a good 30 for 30 that whole year. They just did a 30 for 30, and the entire Vanderbilt took a year off to first time they ever done that from Stanford. And so I got to experience that. And that was just that's how that happened. That by doing my homework and hoping, getting in the selection committee's head and talking to Tara a ton, who would be 3 of those potential Olympians. So I was just as elated as they were when they were chosen.
Wow, you must have been like on pins and needles. And talk about like betting on yourself and your expertise and your relationships to like pick the winners and get them on your team.
Yeah. It was I've always been a gut person. Then it was named emotional intelligence, right? I've always been relational, people person. But I've always had great connections, valued them. I did not have to be the one at the front of the room. Pat Summitt used to always, she led from the back of the room. She was never on the board of directors of the WBCA, but she was a huge, she was a huge contributor, own and own and own and own. So you just listen more, and not, if you're not talking, you're listening and gaining some intel, you hope. And I've always liked anecdotal, what people aren't saying, or I'm not a big empirical person. And I think sometimes that speaks louder than the dots and spots and the metrics and the digital and, all the different platforms.
Yeah. And I'm curious, and I don't know exactly how to ask the question, but you spent 18 years with the WBCA. Was it like, for us, like working in the sports industry, we're often the minority, like there's more men in the room than women. And you spent so much of your career working on women's sports with a room full of women. So what do you think is kind of like the difference in how you developed or your belief in women's leadership or your leadership skills? Like, how do you think that environment impacted the person you are today?
Another great question, because I think what I learned at Converse, being the only female, but I was very comfortable with that, because young boys, whether it be pee-wee football or little league baseball, they immediately start learning the dynamics of a skill set that athletics teaches you, collaboration, teamwork. And so I kind of thrived at Converse because I knew that leadership style or that culture. But I was learning all the way playing sports. And I don't think that's what I hate, when young girls don't at least try a sport somehow. They might not last, but to have the experience of being coached by a good coach. And so what was interesting, I think I worked with maybe I think it was 13 Division I head coaches. And I mean the big names, Gina Ariam. It goes on, Marsha Sharp, Teresa Grants, Sherry Cole from Oklahoma, and they all had different leadership styles and strengths and weaknesses, but it was the still template I was very used to. Does that make sense in that environment? Because that's how they came along. That was their apprentice learning. And one of the misconceptions, interesting enough, is our membership at the WBCA was like 65% women and 35% men, or it skewed almost higher at times. So there was a lot of coaches, male coaches of women's basketball, like Doug Bruno. So he was a president. So I just said, I'm probably the luckiest person to have been coached, not on the floor, but learning them and their leadership style, how they like to communicate, how much communication do they like. And it was, if I could write a complete sentence, I would love to write a book about that experience of and someone made the Final Four and they were too busy, but they still made their obligations, and people were just like in awe that they still did their own court demonstration, right? Because they love the sport, and they're in the Final Four, and they would come over to our convention with about 3,000 coaches of women's basketball, and still participate. And then there's other ones that wouldn't return my call. I might put them back at the back of the book that say they give back like they should have.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like a lot of when you're working in business and you've had experiences in both, right? Like you might have a leader who was promoted just through natural progression, not because they're the best leader in the room, but because they could get the sales numbers, or have some longevity factor that dictates the promotion. In sports, like I think leadership comes from, as a head coach, like you have to be a great leader. Like that is the core foundation most of the time. So the fact that you like got to grow up and spend your career around true leaders and coaches is something that I wish, some more of us could experience, like beyond our little league. Like, can we still have this type of level of coach feedback, direction, sort of no holds barred. Like as a boss, sometimes you don't want to say the thing that you don't want to say, but as a coach, it's like, you just say it.
Why are you shooting from the pain? I told you, right. And another little aside is I've never coached a day in my life. I knew I didn't want to coach, so I was lucky to go a different path. So I had time to listen differently at open practices, or when I would visit them to do, to work on the WBCA, and so I think that was helpful. I didn't know what X from I know what X from no, but I think they dropped their guard because I wasn't into recruiting. They would share their secret sauce a lot of times, and that confidentiality really, served me well. And like I said, I had, I was trusted in their little pack.
Mm-hmm. And, the other side of the coaches is the players. And today you're building connections in NIL market, creating some very innovative solutions. Can you talk about this business sector, including some of the revolutionary partnerships you've created? And how should our listeners who work in the industry get involved or start to think about NIL?
I tell you, everything's innovative though, because it's only 2 years old. And there's few parameters. There's no guardrails. We've heard all the cool verbiage out there. But it's time now. Two things I feel like we need to quit using the pandemic and the supply chain issues. It's time to be fixed. Now, we're 2 years out of it, or getting out of it. That drives me crazy. When I get on I'm not gonna tell you who I called an airline. They're still saying, because of the pandemic, your calls could be. I'm like, come on, you're better than that. You're a top 500 company. You figure it out. So I kind of use the same thing with NIL. We knew it was coming, and we weren't ready for it. We are all on this. If commissioners say the same thing, athletic directors, coaches probably were the last to really hear about. It's not about recruiting. It's not about officiating, so it's not going to affect me. It's like complaining about gravity. It is here to stay. We might not like it. Let's quit. I'm not picking at Jim because I've used the same thing. I love this one. It's the Wild Wild West. We're flying a plane while we're building it. I like that one, but it's here to stay. And we got to quit complaining about it and use that energy to figure it out. And my gut is, if we wait on Congress to figure it out, we're at 50 different states. We see how 50 different states handle the pandemic, how they handle a Supreme Court decision differently. So if we let the states manage it, it's only going to get crazier. So I think that ecosystem of college athletics, we need to govern ourselves. And this is probably going to be a really hot topic, but one other skill set I'm proud of, or I'm thankful for, is there are incredible, bright, brilliant, full-time staffers at the NCAA headquarters in Indianapolis. The acronym is confusing. Some say it's not consistent of anything NCAA, but it's not a league like football. It didn't have one commissioner, Roger. He didn't. So people need to give them some slack. They also do Division I, Division II, and Division III. So what happens when everybody has a vote or a voice? A lot of minutia, a lot of bureaucracy. So I always think they could do better in their narrative. It didn't, and I love Reese Davis, Jay Billis. If you're on here, I think you like to think you're the smartest guy in the room, but you drive me crazy because you don't always have you don't encompass the female athlete. You're just talking about basketball or maybe football, and you hear like, oh, Division I or the big conferences should pull off and do this. Well, that would be catastrophic for Title IX. It'd be catastrophic for not just female student athletes, but male Olympic athletes. And I want them to understand that. The one thing that NCAA is very good at is doing championships that cost a lot of money to be put on for the Olympic sports, as well as all divisions. So if they could pull that revenue off just to protect the football championship or the March Madness, which I obviously love, baseball contributes a little bit, the World Series, but I think they're very misinformed, and it's scary. They're the size of their microphone.
It's so interesting because depending on who you talk to, it's a different angle, or if it's a different take. I had a conversation recently with a woman working in NIL, and at her school, her D1 school, women are out earning men 4x because we know how to use social media. We know how to leverage community. Like, we know how to put our time and energy into something that benefits us. And she's like, the girls are just knocking it out of the park. And so, through that lens, I think, like, what an opportunity to finally reward some of these athletes for all their hard work. And also it's teaching them like business skills. They're managing their own little micro business inside the university. And I mean, talk about running out of the gate if you don't pursue a professional or Olympic career in your sport. If you interview for an employer and say, oh, I signed and inked 50K in deals per year while I was at university.
Like I'm renewed, right?
Yeah.
Which I was very proficient at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just marvel, and I love hearing, on a platform or podcast, but especially on ESPN, which is always on the background, wherever I am, is that the male commentators, you got Aguma K, like that was president of the Players Association when everything was going down, and they have mobilized. And I mean, Sue Bird, I mean, there's brilliant, articulate female athletes in all sports. WNBA, they're probably the most, and the guys are saying this, they got their act together on their message. They don't let anybody stray off of it. And from Brittany Griner, getting her back, to influencing a very contested, because I lived it, very contested election in Atlanta. Pretty powerful. To your point, women usually more accessible. Just think about the LPGA does better on their pro-ams. You can still go and touch and get autographs. A lot of female athletes, and that's seeing it and being it, right? For young women coming along, and the young boys, they don't know the difference. They just think it's cool. And that's a part of the evolution of changing stereotypes and systemic discriminations.
Yeah, you're so right. And I think at this point we've got to really highlight like just how great you are, Beth. We were joking, this is your promo show, but okay, so get ready to glow. You were recognized for your lifetime of innovative contributions to the advancement of athletics and received the 2020 Naismith Award, which is presented annually to the most outstanding men's and women's basketball players and coaches. And you were inducted into the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame in 2019. So what do these awards mean to you? And what work is there still left to do in women's basketball?
Because of all my fortunate opportunities and the mentors, professional, to colleagues on NCAA committees, I felt like I was kind of relieved to get in the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame because I feel like I would have let so many people down who's already in there. Does that make sense? I mean, like, maybe I have not wasted all my learnings.
And I love that. I love that you said that because you're thinking about that group that helped lift you up and provide those opportunities and like not just what it meant to you, but what it meant to them to have that recognition for you.
So kind of relief and like, whoo, and nobody can ever take it away from you, right? And like, there was no Women's Basketball Hall of Fame when I grew up in Hartsville, South Carolina, and I didn't even know how to dream of being in a Hall of Fame because there wasn't even one. But then I didn't know exactly what to expect with the Naismith because I was on the board. Now this is Naismith Player of the Year, and I was again so fortunate. That one kind of surprised me. I got it with Jim Nance, the silver fox voice of the Masters of March Madness, and I'm like, I'm gonna ride his coattails till. In the press release, I'm like, I can't believe this is so cool. I'm getting on board with Jim Nance. And interesting enough, I've been able to get to about half a dozen men's Final Fours because I was kind of busy. So when it was finally given out, because it was the pandemic, and they kept pushing it out, and when they would call me, Eric Oberman, who runs the Atlanta Tip-Off Club that houses Naismith, he would ask me, I'm sure you want to get me checked off. And I said, I'm not getting it until Jim Nance accepts it because I want to be in the room and get my picture taken with him. And he goes, all right, Beth. So it happened last year in New Orleans at the men's Final Four, and I could barely get through. The incredible. I mean, it's at the men's Final Four. There's 600 people there, and it's at the World War II War Museum, and I love history, and I'm a proud patriot of my country. I just fear my government, but I was blown away, and I could hardly get through saying this, was that a little girl growing up in Hartsville, South Carolina, if you would have told her my name would be in the same sentence as the word Naismith and Jim Nance, come on, that's pretty cool. Well, I got the picture.
Let's see it. Oh, there it is. There's the photo. So I love that. I love that. And like thinking back, to that little girl moment, like, what would you tell her, right? Back then, like if you were to go back and visit Elizabeth Bass at 10 years old, like what do you share?
With a lot of therapy and a lot of experience, I would say be yourself because everybody else is taken.
Mm-hmm.
But a little 10-year-old from Hartsville, South Carolina, being a tomboy to the word degree, following my older brother around, it just wouldn't, you got to see it you got to see role models to emulate them. And thank goodness I chose some good ones to imprint by.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that authenticity, that being true to yourself has led you through just a phenomenal career. And this is the Leadership is Female podcast. So what is the biggest leadership lesson that you've learned that you can share with our audience?
Oh, so many. There's a sidebar, and it's all about access. And everybody says how creative I am, or I'm, or I'm a collaborator, all that. But like, I was successful because I had access. I was at corporate headquarters at Converse. I was at the home office, the mothership at Nike. I was sitting in meetings where I was hearing what was going on with the men's side of the house. So I could implement that, and everybody thought I was brilliant, because that's not before you were exchanging information. I said, well, it would apply over here. So I don't know if I'm that creative or marketer. It was just like maybe my brain, a little tilt of the axis, and a different application can, be not one size fits all, but this will work on the women's side. But again, you got female professionals, athletes, access is, you gotta, somebody said it best, Anuka Brown that played at Northwestern, then she went to the NCAA, she says, if you're not at the dinner table, you are the main entree in a boardroom, right? Your budgets will get cut. You're not gonna have a voice. I mean, it gives me chills. That's the truth. And so that goes through sports, politics. We gotta share. And one leadership, back to your question as I go off on a tangent, is I think you've gotta be secure enough to hire smarter people than you, or they have skill sets that you don't have, and you can't be intimidated. And that has served me very well. And somebody goes, "Are you gonna get your master's?" And I said, "No, I hired one. You get your MBA." No, I got a master's, but I can't even hardly remember what it's in. But you need an MBA. No, I just hired a great one at the WBCA.
I love that.
And I have to talk about Coach Summit. One thing, like, when I will never forget this, is 87, their first national championship. And I think people don't know, she went to I think double digits before she won. She would not have survived that if it was the mass media we have, right? So she won in 87. It was in Austin, Texas. We always did this little annual thing. We'd go down to a tennis tournament in Hilton Head about the week or so after. And I said, I can't wait. She got it in her contract in 87 from Converse. She got $5,000 if she won a national championship. So I was so proud. I walked around the building, went through accounts payable. I'm going to present this $5,000 to Pat Summit, and we're going to have a big time in Hilton Head. And so somehow we were alone, sitting on a picnic table at our little hotel or whatever, pull out this check, and she goes, "Oh, Bass, I meant to tell you, I wanted you to make this out $2,500 to Mickey DeMoss and $2,500 to Holly." Those were her two assistants. So that was quite the impression. They're paying the taxes, but you take care of your staff, you take care of your valued team, whoever that might be, your COO, your CMO, whoever it is, protect your talent and take care of them.
I love that story. And I've been fortunate to hear a lot of Pat Summit stories along this journey of the podcast. And she continues to make just such an incredible impact on all of us. And I'll shout out, on this podcast now, like if you don't have a mentor, just go back into Pat's career and follow what she did. And there's, it's so devastating for those, I'm sure, even closest to her, how we lost her, but her lessons are evergreen and ones that should not be forgotten. So if we can do our small part in having people who didn't get the chance to watch her coach, or haven't seen stories about her on ESPN, like, she is one of the ultimate leaders. And Beth, I'm so happy you shared and just resurrected a personal story with her to just demonstrate like what an incredible leader she was.
Well, I think I've username 3. I always say that's the most I can do on a presentation, a speech, a podcast. So I'm going to try to abstain. I can tell other great coaches stories.
Yeah, well, lucky for you, I'm a huge fan of hers, and you didn't even know that about me before we got on today, but I mean, who isn't? So what a great surprise to get to talk about her on the podcast. So you have had this great career we've touched on many a times, and you've got an incredible skill set, but how much do you think that the skill of confidence and willpower have played into your success?
All right, I'm gonna break my rule. To read her books or listen to her books, I just wish we had her voice like we do now with the authors. She always, one of her tenets of her, I think it's 12, I can't even remember now. Discipline yourself so nobody else has to. And so you might not have the skill set, but you can play defense. It just takes effort, more effort. You got to outwork everybody, make yourself valuable. And that's what she taught. And if you're not on time, you're like quarter till, you better be on the bus. Another time, I don't know where they're going. I think it was an SEC tournament, and I was driving myself, and she left the mascot. He was late. Smokey. So I followed the bus. I thought surely he'll pull off, and then like a highway patrolman that was helping him escort out finally pulled him over so Smokey could get. But she left the mascot. Now you're late.
Hold people accountable if they can't hold themselves, right? I love that it seems like such a brave move today, right? Like we're pretty soft when it comes to discipline. And so that reminder to discipline yourself and stay committed to your goals and what you committed to so that no one else has to is fantastic. So you left Adidas just over 2 years ago after heading up the NCAA college partnerships. What's life look like for you now in Atlanta, and what are you working on at Beth Bass Inc.?
Funny you should ask that. I'm not in Atlanta anymore. I am looking out. I'm in big orange country, which has been a great move because I've got a great group of friends here, and I'm close to campus. And you're right. I was even surprised. I moved here about a year ago that she is still so revered. I mean, it's unbelievable. Any male, female, football, basketball, they got the Summit blue trim. I mean, that's been special. And I went to an NIL panel, and they had like a softball student athlete, 2 basketball, and a volleyball. And they asked an open-ended question, what made you come here? And no matter the sport, Pat Summitt. I was pleasantly surprised that even this generation, different sports, they wanted to come where the legacy is.
Yeah, I love that. Well, that's sounds like you've landed in the right place, and really looking forward to seeing all that you do as your career continues to roll forward and be successful. So on this podcast, fitting for also the month of March, but I do it all year round, is the final 4 questions. So want to ask your top piece of advice for women to apply today to level up tomorrow.
First of all, I don't know if you mean actually apply. You've seen the statistics. Be confident enough to apply for everything. Don't wait for somebody to ask you. Males just have that, they're going to apply for that job, even though there's 6 major, bricks in the job description. They got 2 out of 6, they're going to apply. If we don't have one, we're like, oh, they're going to apply. Talking about access and keys, I can't stand the word networking because it seems artificial. And it reminds me when I was growing up, you had to hold your tea and your white gloves and hand a card out. I hate that. Networking today is volunteering and getting some experience. If it's pulling the court at production at a televised basketball game or football game, volunteer. Make somebody else look better, carry their equipment for them. Like I said, take them to the airport, bring them a pizza if they're trying to meet a deadline. And that's how you get your foot in the door or be included and having access. The people that you meet around athletics, but let's not network. Let's volunteer and roll our sleeves up.
Love it. All right. Where are you traveling to next?
I'm going to Dallas for the women's Thursday through Saturday. And then a dear friend has gotten the Naismith this year, Chris Polanski from University of Texas, well deserved. I don't know how I got it before. That was an oversight. I guess I put my posters up, vote for me, better than she would. She would never do that. So then I go over to Houston, and I'm excited. March Madness is my favorite time of the year. I was even born in March.
Oh, love it. Okay. What is your starting lineup walkout song?
Oh, that's funny because Gino, I'm not gonna cuss on this. Gino, everybody says he's a smart ass. I said, but you know what? He really is a smart ass. He really is. He was a phenomenal president of the WBCA, and we were doing a panel for the WNBA, and I wanted my background to be waiting for the world to change. So it was a while back, and he busted on me and says, "That's the stupidest song. If you're sitting back waiting, you're never going to make my team. You're never going to be seen in a courtroom or a courtroom or a boardroom." So that was funny when you said that. Like, I used to love that song. So now I don't even like it because I feel like, he busting on me. I think Natalie Merchant, Thank You. Is that the real name of it? That was my walkout song for the Hall of Fame.
Perfect. Okay. And then you've given us amazing quotes, and I'm a huge quote person. So we finish with your favorite quote. What is your favorite quote?
Changes daily, though. One quote.
Now it depends on when you ask me, right?
Today I'm having.
To sum up this interview, what is your favorite quote?
Right. Got to see her at an NBA All-Star game. Madeleine Albright said, "There's a special place in hell for women who don't help women." And I went, wow. I've met some women that are pretty comfortable in their shoes. That was one. She was a powerhouse.
Oh, man, that's so good. And so good, I think, to finish this discussion today, celebrating your career, which is still like full force, full court press. And I'm so grateful for you to share so much that you've learned from these inspirational coaches that have helped shape your career. So Beth, we can't wait to continue to cheer you on. And thank you for being on the Leadership is Female podcast.
Absolutely my pleasure. And thank you for your great work and for dreaming up this very needed conversation.